Need tools? We've got you covered. Go to ChromebookParts.com or click on the link below to pick up this sleek, portable toolkit. Flip the unit over and remove 9 6mm screws from the bottom cover. Gently insert the opener pick between the bottom cover and the palmrest and slide along the edges to pop the bottom cover free. Peel back the tape and unplug the battery from the motherboard. Remove 6 4mm screws from the heatsink and fan. Unplug the fan from the daughterboard and remove the heatsink. Flip open the locking clip and unplug the LCD cable from the motherboard. Gently lift up to unplug the antenna cables from the motherboard. Unplug the speakers from the motherboard. Flip open the locking clip and unplug the sensor board from the motherboard. Peel back the tape, flip open the locking clip, and unplug the keyboard backlight from the motherboard. Flip open the locking clip and unplug the palmrest cable from the motherboard. Flip open the locking clip and unplug the touchpad cable from the motherboard. Flip open the locking clips and unplug the daughterboard cables from the motherboard. Remove 1 3mm screw from the SSD. Gently pull back to unplug the SSD from the motherboard. Remove 5 3mm screws from the motherboard and 3 4mm screws from the hinge. Gently lift up and pull back on the motherboard, taking care not to bend or damage the ports. Remove 2 3mm screws from the daughterboard and 3 4mm screws from the hinge. Unplug the gyroscope cable from the daughterboard. Lift up the hinge, and gently lift up and pull back on the daughterboard, taking care not to bend or damage the ports. Peel the sensor board cable from the bottom cover, and gently lift up to remove the sensor board. Lift the speakers off their posts and unwind their cable from its grooves. Peel back the tape and remove 3 2mm screws from the touchpad. Lift the Palmrest partway up and push down to pop the touchpad free. Raise the hinges and gently wiggle the Palmrest free to remove. Replace the Palmrest and line it up with the hinges. Replace the touchpad and pop it back into place. Replace the 3 2mm screws back into the touchpad. Replace the speakers back onto their posts and wind their cable back into its grooves. Replace the Daughterboard back into its port slots, lower the hinge, and replace the 2 3mm screws into the Daughterboard and 3 4mm screws into the hinge. Plug the gyroscope cable back into the Daughterboard. Replace the sensor board and stick its cable back onto the bottom cover. Replace the motherboard back into its port slots and be sure to get all the cables out from underneath. Plug the LCD cable back into the motherboard and reseat the cable into its grooves. Plug the speakers back into the motherboard. Gently push down to plug the antenna cables back into the motherboard. Plug the sensor board cable back into the motherboard. Plug the keyboard backlight cable back into the motherboard. Plug the Palmrest cable back into the motherboard. Plug the touchpad cable back into the motherboard. Plug the SSD back into the motherboard. Replace the one 3mm screw back into the SSD. Plug the Daughterboard cables back into the motherboard. Using a 99% isopropyl alcohol solution, clean the thermal paste off the heatsink. Apply a small dab of thermal paste to the motherboard as shown, and replace the heatsink back onto the motherboard. Replace the 6 4mm screws back into the heatsink and fan. Plug the fan back into the Daughterboard. Replace the 5 3mm screws back into the motherboard and the 3 4mm screws back into the hinge. Replace the battery back onto its posts. And plug the battery back into the motherboard. Replace the bottom cover and push down to snap it back into place. Replace the 9 6mm screws back into the bottom cover.